Scientists are some of the most interesting fighting game characters, since they usually bring their inventions or experiments to the fight. Some of them are not inherently fighters, so they have to make up for their lack of physical strength or no knowledge of trained martial arts by instead using technology, biology, ecology, and a whole bunch of other ologies. Or sometimes they actually do know how to fight, and being a scientist is just a part of their backstory. Regardless, I'll be looking at the top scientists in fighting games. While they don't need to bring their science into the arena to be considered for this list, it's definitely cooler when they do. Even if they originated outside of fighting games, as long as these characters are scientists in fighting games, they're eligible for this list. Also, no restrictions on how many entries can be from the same series, since some games like to overload us with scientist options. And joining me as a co-host in this video is a real-life teacher who can help us learn about science, being my mom.
Hi everyone! Since I always like to create science experiments in school, I'm glad to be back to discuss scientists in fighting games.
Now, let's calculate the top 10 scientists in fighting games. Number 10, Lisa Hamilton from Dead or Alive. Not much is known about Lisa's scientific knowledge, but she has been consistently working on the science team for various organizations in the Dead or Alive universe. These organizations generally have nefarious motives, like creating the ultimate fighter using DNA from real fighters that participate in the tournaments set up by these organizations. Her primary job was with M.O.D.O.K, working on their top secret cloning project using genes from main character and tournament champion Kasumi. Considering that she was the head scientist at some point, one could assume that she knows about the complexities involved with cloning, so she likely has some advanced knowledge on biology and genetics. Even after learning about the evil of the organizations that she worked for, she stayed on their payroll as some sort of undercover agent. She could gain intel on their cloning projects and help out her allies from the inside. Despite her knowledge of science, it doesn't factor into her playstyle, which is a lucha libre capoeira mix of attacks, though she can still wear her lab coat to the fight to indicate to her opponent that she has a doctorate in science and pain. So overall, she has a history of leg workouts, wrestling matches, and gene splicing.
I like her combination of quick jabs and kicks. Imagine if she cloned herself. What a tag team that would be. I'd watch that match.
I'm not sure if she'd want to volunteer herself to be cloned with any of the Dead or Alive facilities that are doing it. Those clones turn out to be a bit flawed, but Lisa can just keep up her training to have the strength of a tag team.
Did you really think you'd win?
Number 9, Aswell from Soul Calibur. Aswell's not your ordinary scientist. He's studying the Cursed Sword and the Spirit Sword, i.e. Soul Edge and Soul Calibur. So he's looking to combine science and magic, as those swords are not rooted in reality. One sword wants destruction, the other wants order, so trying to combine those powers will just create chaos, and that's what Aswell is willing to try out. He's a scholar of history, the arts, and for this list, science. After some long journeys to get shards of each sword, he uses a bit of alchemy to create gauntlets to house the shards. So thanks to the power of combining 16th century science with magic, he can summon soul-infused weapons and manipulate them in the air for some stunning combos, and the way he swings them is not random. They move in ways to recreate past battles of the weapons they're based on. Aswell does this by tuning the shards in the gauntlets to waves that contain data about said past battles. With this, he uses his knowledge of combat to emulate actual combat, which is an ingenious way to overcome his lack of fighting prowess, and he has a bit of sensory overload when he uses these weapons, since multiple of them can go flying at once, with a lovely red and blue color scheme. At least they're pretty to look at.
I love his colorful weapons and the way he annihilates his opponents with them. Imagine if he used them for good. He could make a fortune putting on firework displays. 4th of July, New Year's Eve, birthday parties, weddings. The list is endless. Maybe I could be his marketing consultant.
Careful, or else he'll make you the star of the light show right in the middle of it, shown off in his super move, which he calls From Science with Love, hammering in his magical science motif even more.
Accept this from me, my love! Excellently done.
Number 8. Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik in Sonic the Fighters. Eggman is one of the most iconic video game scientists of all time, and since he was in a fighting game, might as well give him a shout out on this list. Sonic the Fighters pitted a bunch of Sonic the Hedgehog characters against each other in a fighting game setting, and it was pretty alright. No big stages, no minions to fight, only main characters, fists, and kicks. Eggman is just on final boss duty for the original version of this game, where he is in a mech suit. Not his best invention, but I guess it does the job of matching the punches of Sonic and friends. I guess when Sonic's not running, Eggman doesn't feel he needs to go all out. If we're trying to differentiate this suit from his main game boss battle suits, I suppose it's so amazing based on how far the opponent goes flying when they're hit by it.
His robot suit seems very cumbersome. It almost looks like he's struggling to pull off his kicks, though I really like his helicopter arm motions.
I don't know, I think this mech seems unfinished, or maybe he just wanted to give us a good look at his face, and fighting in half a robot suit gives us an opportunity to look at his iconic mustache.
I also think his eyeglasses are cool. Bold, crazy glasses are all the rage right now. What a shame he's not using all the technological advances built into them for good rather than evil.
When the game was re-released in 2012, Sega gave us the option to play as Eggman in Versus mode, so now we could show our opponent firsthand the true terror of Eggman's robots. Okay, maybe not terror for this one, but you could at least give them the boot. Number 7. Stun from Bloody Roar. Bloody Roar has a pair of scientists, one who's moral and wants to help the world with their work, named Steven, and one who had unorthodox methods to his experiments, named Busuzima. They worked for an organization named Tylon, which is a nefarious business that experimented on people to make them living weapons by combining their DNA with animals, which is how everyone in this game can transform into humanoid animals to fight. When Steven learned about the horrors of this organization, he thought he could trust his colleague Busuzima to help put a stop to this internally. However, instead, Busuzima tricked him, saying he just needed to participate in an experiment firsthand to understand, wanting to see how humans would combine with insect DNA. The experiment didn't go as planned, and the DNA fused with his normal body, leaving it blue and unstable. He can still turn into a humanoid beetle, but his human form will remain blue and buggy regardless. Now he vows revenge against Busuzima and Tylon as his body decays and he struggles to retain his memories, renaming himself Stun. While he can no longer help the world with his research, at least he targets criminals when wandering around in his new form, even though he'll savagely beat and or kill them due to his now cynical view on life. Though his way of attacking is generally pretty organized, using wrestling techniques. The attacks can be brutal, like smashing the opponent's face against his body or the ground, but there's a method to his pain. He's embracing the vigilante lifestyle with some grappling.
He's got power in his legs and drop kicks. He could definitely go on WWE if this doesn't work out for him. Beast Drive could be a signature move. Or being part beetle, I see a movie in his future. The Fly's evil cousin. It's just a working title.
Let's be fair to him. Stun is far from evil. He's just misunderstood. That being said, he does have a similar backstory to Jeff Goldblum, and for a guy with a deteriorating body, he uses a really intense moveset. He's been doing a good job keeping his muscle build intact throughout the rest of his body falling apart.
My revenge has only begun.
Number 6. M.O.D.O.K in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. M.O.D.O.K is one of the most unique fighting game characters I've ever seen, and I think it's cool that they chose him over some standard type of supervillain. He's a villain of various Marvel superheroes, and is essentially a living supercomputer built off a guy who underwent an experiment to increase his intelligence for the sake of research. However, the experiment increased his head size, leading to him using that fancy hoversuit, and he just decided to use all all of his new knowledge to kill and experiment on others, giving himself the title of Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing, aka M.O.D.O.K. Since he doesn't have good mobility with his limbs, he mostly fights with scientific projectiles. He has psionic blasts with his mind energy, barriers, bombs, goo, and many other tricks in his suit. He also uses analyze cubes to gather data on his foe, which gives him the data whenever the foe touches the cubes. They're also just hard to walk by. When he gets this knowledge, it causes the light on his forehead to grow brighter. Then he can power up his other attacks with the stored data, or he can just use it all at once with one super mind laser.
Max power! Hell yeah!
And when all else fails, M.O.D.O.K knows he can use his big head as a blunt object, battering ram style. The man's resourceful, how could you hate him?
I definitely don't like him from his dastardly grin to his gummy worm legs. He reminds me of a character in a bug spray commercial zapping bugs and someone shouting, "Raid!"
Okay, yeah, he was a pretty polarizing inclusion when he was first announced, since his body did not look conducive to fighting and he was just kinda weird, but I loved him. I feel like they also nailed the funny and serious factor with him. M.O.D.O.K was generally treated as a serious villain in the comics, but there were some modern pushes to make him funny. I think there was a good balance here with him.
Bye-bye!
Captain America will still take him seriously, calling M.O.D.O.K a madman, but then you have goofier interactions, like when M.O.D.O.K steals Galactus's helmet in his own arcade mode ending, or just how he interacts with Rocket Raccoon.
I defeated a raccoon! Science!
Whoever wrote his lines in this game had some fun, since M.O.D.O.K was chatty, having something to say to nearly every character added in the Ultimate version of the game, along with everyone he already interacted with in the vanilla version. M.O.D.O.K certainly puts the fun in funny looking, and puts the killing in Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing.
Killer illumination! Hold that pose!
Combo KO!
Cry for me!
You win!
Number 5, Poison Ivy in the Injustice series. Originating in DC Comics as a Batman villain, Poison Ivy has a lot of history. She's a biochemist who wants to save the world's plant life, even at the expense of humanity as we know it. The Injustice iteration of Poison Ivy is a pretty standard version of her. She's always had a myriad of plant powers that vary based on what's going on in the comic or show that she's in, so NetherRealm went all out to make a unique moveset that utilizes plants in all kinds of ways. With her special plant formulas, she's become one with the foliage and can create plants that we've never seen before, alongside her signature Poison Kiss that's consistent in almost all her media.
My favorite evil scientist, hands down. I love her use of plant power in combination with her agile fighting style, especially the dinosaur-like plant creatures she creates and the plant spores that she blows into her opponent's face. It reminds me of my most favorite episode in the original Lost in Space, Attack of the Monster Plants, where Judy Robinson is cloned into a plant creature. If I were an evil scientist, she's the one I'd want to most be like. Even if I were a good scientist, I'd still find a use for those poison plant powers. Maybe getting rid of the mice in the basement and the chipmunk who keeps digging holes in my garden.
I'm not sure if she'd ever want to target animals first. She's more against people as her main enemy. Then again, if those animals tried to harm her precious plants, I guess it's vegetation over anything breathing in oxygen.
Poison Ivy wins.
Number 4, Relius Clover from BlazBlue. Relius is a master scientist whose ambition knows no bounds. Unfortunately, his interest in science undermines everything else in his life, including his family. Relius wants to rebuild the world in a way that he feels fit, so he's the hero of his own story in his head. His goal is to use science to overrule the gods, thereby rendering them obsolete. His signature experiment is putting human human souls in robots to power them. While that is immoral on its own, it's even worse that he likely deceived his family to use their souls and then either tossed them out or used them as puppets. His first test with this method was using the ancient robot Nirvana after it was inactive. He tricked his daughter Ada into being the test subject and swiftly abandoned the project when he thought the soul transfer was unsuccessful. His son Carl was able to use Nirvana in attempts to save his sister's soul, which I went into more detail about for Carl's side of the story on my puppet character list, but Relius had new plans. He found success using the soul of his wife Ignis in his detonator-style robot, which he built from scratch based on Nirvana, but since he made it, he knew all the ins and outs of it, so the soul transfer was successful, and now Relius fights with his robot wife. Unlike Nirvana, which just stays on the field and is a bit clunky, Ignis can be summoned at any time and goes away when Relius doesn't need her. It seems Relius is quite the innovator, only copying the most efficient parts of Nirvana when creating his robot. Of course, he does add some enhancements. Ignis attacks with fast, clean stabs, and even has a cool pair of shoes that are actually just drills. But Relius is a man of many inventions. We always focus on the robots with him, since those are his key inventions, but never forget what's under his cape. He can fight solo with his array of hidden robot hands.
He reminds me of a human claw machine, only his prizes are people. I definitely don't want to play that game.
His line of work really does go beyond robotics and alchemy, because he's willing to take his opponent and experiment on them, regardless of how their genetic makeup would fit his research. He decides this by, well, if you lose to him, he takes you. Bad deal.
なかなか面白い素材だ。さて、実験の時間だ。
Number 3, Dr. Boskanovich from Tekken. Dr. Boskanovich is a very important character to Tekken, but not an important fighter. As in, he's vital to the lore, but was just added as a fighter in a few games for some goofs. In the story, he's helped to develop the Jack line of robots, gave Yoshimitsu his cybernetic arm, saved Brian Fury's life with a cybernetic heart, worked on experiments for Kazuya under duress leading to some more nefarious inventions, created Roger the boxing kangaroo, created Alex the boxing dinosaur, created the cryogenic sleep pods that the Williams sisters used, and made the android Elisa in the image of his deceased daughter so her legacy could live on. How about that for series relevance? Without him, we never would have gotten either robot in the series, and that's a timeline I don't want to be in. It's up to you to decide on what his best invention is, but I'd say it's Elisa, since she's a mobile android with chainsaw arms, and the story is bittersweet, how he built a kind AI just so he could get a semblance of his daughter back. With all that lore though, Namco decided to use his NPC character model for more than just background duty, so they made him a joke fighter in Tekken 3, where he used moves from other characters, since the joke was that this character was actually stepping into the ring, so they didn't create anything new for him. However, Tekken Tag Tournament 2 made it a mission to include every character that's ever been playable in Tekken, so the good doctor returned once again with some new tricks for the fight, grounded in science. He can now utilize static electricity for shocking results, and drop pocket explosions because he keeps pure unadulterated science in his pockets. It helps him keep up with a roster where he's at least twice the age of most of the other fighters, basically like the universal grandparent of the roster.
He could be everybody's grandpa, take you out on the weekends and build you a robot. Be careful though if you ask him for candy from his pocket, cause everything in it explodes. Kinda like Pop Rocks on steroids.
Since he still has roots as a joke character, his back starts acting up when he fights, and he goes into pain mode, which acts as a fighting stance where he writhes for a second and then does some motions out of it that also double as attacks to share the pain with his opponent. Because he's still not a trained fighter and has no business taking on most of the other characters in this game, he's a slow and weak fighter, but if you're just looking to have some fun, his weird playstyle should hopefully make up for his lack of fighting skill.
You win.
Number 2, Dr. Doom in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. He may have originated in comic books, but Doom's involvement with the Versus series makes him feel synonymous with fighting games to me. There's something so demanding about his crossed arms idle pose and confident walk cycle that make him iconic. Not to mention his look, which follows his classic costume of green robe and metal suit.
He looks sort of like an evil version of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. Does he rust in the rain? How much oil does he need?
Doom requires no oil. With his fighting game legacy, I sometimes forget he's a comic book character first and foremost, and one with a lot of backstory that you never get to see in the fighting games. His hatred of Reed Richards, leading a country, his mother's soul being held hostage by the devil, which is very complicated. Pick your favorite Doom storyline and apply it to the fighting game version.
Although he's evil, he still gets points from me for freeing his mother's soul, even if it meant she would hate him forever as part of the deal.
Since Doom is a master of science, technology, and magic, he displays all that in his moveset. His main skill involves using photons, which he has a variety of uses for. A full-on beam, some fireworks, or the fan-favorite finger lasers. The photons also power up his physical attacks when he touches his opponent. This makes for his most terrifying attack, a foot dive. Seriously, this was such a good combo starter in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and I like the concept of saying that this man's greatest tool, with millions of dollars of technology at his disposal, is his foot, with photon help. He also has a molecular shield, which hurls rocks at the opponent, and hidden missiles, which are so hidden that he has them under every frame of every stage in the game. Truly, no one can out-prepare Doom.
Combo KO! You win!
In a world where scientists roam free in fighting games, we sought to find the fighter whose moveset was the most science-y, and we came to the conclusion with number 1, Cohost from BlazBlue. She's mostly here due to her playstyle, but let's take a peek at her backstory. She initially worked with Relius, but after learning about what he was doing and still being a moral cat person, she left him to pursue her own scientific dreams. Project 1, rebuilding the warrior Tager to become a cyborg so he could live and fight. The cybernetics of Tager seem like Cohost's most impressive invention, but she actually has a lot of experience with robotics overall, which can be seen with Ragna's mechanical arm that she rebuilt. She then consistently works against the evil threats in this universe, but is generally someone who likes working alone, though she does seem to like working with Tager, probably because he uses a bunch of her creations in his body and that shows her success. She's also good at cloning, using the soul of someone who's deceased and an empty vessel, but that could be considered controversial in universe, so we kinda bury that one under her other accomplishments. Since her mom was a skilled sorceress, Cohost has some magic skills, so some of these inventions have some magic infused in them, even if Cohost would prefer not to use it until necessary. It's hard to tell if she's using magic in her main moveset though, since that is packed to the brim with her inventions. She starts small with her hand wrench as a blunt object, but that's not even the bluntest of her objects. She's got a drill hammer, stronger than a drill, more versatile than a hammer. And you know what's even stronger than a drill hammer? The jackhammer. She's got lots of jackhammer tricks, bringing a new meaning to hammer space. Not to mention, she has a cannon that's almost as big as her, and it doesn't just fire bullets, it can also fire ice. Is that right? Fire ice? Shoot ice? Ice. Also, rockets. Also, enhanced mechanical arms. I'm not sure if she even invented all of these, but I like to think that everything is her creation just because she's that good.
I like the functionality of her clothing, from lasers and rockets to wrenches and scooters. How does she fit them all into her jacket and still look that slim? If she could create a purse that could pack that much in and still look thin, she'd make a fortune. I'd definitely buy one.
Her main invention that she fights with is the Graviton, which is a device that affects nearby gravity, pulling her in or pushing her opponent away depending upon where it's set up. It can also affect her sweltering flame cage, which is a literal fireball that she throws in the air, and the Graviton manipulates the speed of how it descends downwards, finding even more ways to throw her opponent off guard. And even though Tager doesn't fight alongside her, Cohost finds a way to show off her innovations with him anyway by having a giant replica Rebecca Tager fire a laser for her instead. You get all this and more when you choose her to be your lead scientist, and I can't think of a better character to lead this list than Kokonoe.
アルティメットインパクト術式くだらんくだらんぞ科学こそ力だ戦士としては二流だぞココノエ win!
Now, what did you think? Did you like all these scientists? Are some of them failed experiments? Who did we maybe forget about and leave back in the lab? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.